Hello everybody, this is MonteCristo and I'm coming to you with another vlog. So the topic of today's vlog is going to be caster compensation at Riot. And I mentioned this in my vlog about Trindamir's post on Reddit, which I'll just link somewhere over here so you guys can go watch that if you haven't seen it already. I really just sort of touched the surface of the caster compensation issue when it comes to Riot and casters and freelance talent that they use on broadcast. Mostly I was focusing in that last vlog on the fact that Riot casters are sort of caged in by Riot where they can't produce their own content. They can't monetize it on their YouTubes or their Twitch. They do not get paid by independent events that they cast at, such as Intel Extreme Masters, IEM. And that their salaries are, in fact, pretty low when you think about the size of League of Legends, in and of that it is the largest esport in the English-speaking world, and the fact that they have to be exclusive to LoL. And I know a lot of people have talked about this, and they've drawn some very weird conclusions saying that, well, yes, of course freelancers get paid more, because in the standard job market, if I'm, say, a developer, programmer, and I do some freelance work, well, yes, I do make more money, but it's on a short-term basis compared to somebody who is a salaried employee who gets benefits like a retirement plan, medical insurance in America, which is very important, as all Americans can tell you, that it sort of makes up for it, and the stability of the job is really what's there. Unfortunately, that metaphor doesn't really hold up here, because this is not a standard job, and it's not a standard industry. This is an entertainment job, and it's in the entertainment industry, which means that you really have to think more of it like actors, let's say, who do gigs or movies or TV shows one by one, because you have to be able to leverage your personal celebrity and your skills into new jobs in the future, and being tied down for forever, basically, to a single TV show. Of course, that can work out very well as long as you continually renegotiate your contract as the TV show gets more and more popular over the years. But there's also times, say, after the shoot for one season where you can go do other stuff, and that is really what's lacking with the Riot casters. And mostly, too, it's going to really prohibit them from doing things in the future. And I really care about this because a lot of these casters I really respect as my colleagues, and I want them to have successful careers. I want to be working with them for years in the future. I want them to be financially stable and to be getting the amount of money that they really are worth in this industry as some of the most popular, famous professional casters in the English-speaking world. And right now, Riot is doing a very poor job of keeping up with the market in terms of their own casters. They always have. We'll get into that as well, with the exception of very, very early on in League of Legends when the casting market wasn't really the same in the West as it is right now. OGN, working for OGN has always been a better deal, for sure. But there are only so many of us, like me and Doa and Papa and Achilleos, that can get salary jobs. Well, we're freelancers, but consistent work, let's say, out here. And I'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, this is going to be probably pretty long and boring and technical, but I hope it gives you some idea of what's going on. A lot of people have also been saying, well, if it was so bad at Riot, well, why don't the casters say something? Guys, they can't. A lot of them, I talk to them, they really care about these issues. They are afraid of what will happen if they say anything to Riot, because Riot has a monopoly on the casting scene in League of Legends, with the exception of OGN. And again, there's only so many of us who can be out here who want to live in Korea. So many of these other casters would prefer to be in the States or Europe or Australia or other places. And so, considering I don't think I'm ever going to be invited to another international event by Riot, I feel that I sort of have an obligation, an ethical obligation at this point in time, to let this information out there, because I really would like to see this industry change and grow. For the better, and it's not only for these guys, but it's for casters and other games too, because since Riot is the biggest game, when they're underpaying their talent, it really does put a cap on what a lot of the other guys in, let's say, all the other games, Dota, CSGO, etc., can make, even though they are making more money, many of them, than the Riot casters already. They could be making even more, could be more stable for everybody. We could get a better, more healthy esports scene across all titles. So, with that said, let's talk about freelance casting. So let's talk about my job. So I work for OGN, but I am on a year-to-year contract with them as a freelancer, which means that they do not have any control whatsoever about what I do outside of my broadcast time. I have a call time where I show up to the studio. I don't have to come into the OGN office except for meetings on rare occasions. There's no expectation that I show up and even interact with my co-casters if I don't want to. Now I do, because obviously that's smart and professional, and we do work together closely when it comes to preparing for broadcasts and everything like that. But the prep is all on me. It's all on us as a casting unit, and we work as a team in order to get the best product out there possible. But there's no expectation besides I show up at call time, I do the broadcast, I go home. Okay? Now I am paid a monthly, what you might call salary. Now, I chose to do this. I could have gone for a per broadcast day rate, but I wanted to kind of split money more evenly throughout the year. For the most part in Korea, except for the OGN full-time guys, which is, again, me, Doa, Papa, and Achilleos, every other caster in Korea, the Spo TV guys, the Gom TV guys like Tesla Sartosis, Wolf, the Brendan Valdez, the StarCraft guys, they're all on a per broadcast basis. So I could choose to do that too. I'm sure if I wanted to renegotiate my contract for next year with OGN so that I had that option instead, I could. But the point is that my contract says I do specific leagues, specific things. There are only a certain number of days in the month that I can broadcast under the contract because I'm worried about, the health of my voice. When there's no broadcasts going on, such as right now, I can take that time off. I'm free to travel to international events if I choose. I can stream, I can make alternate content, etc., etc. I can go to Worlds like I have in previous years because OGN does the Worlds broadcast here in Korea, so they don't really have a lot of domestic broadcasts going on. Now that has changed this year with Overwatch, and to the degree that even if I had been invited to the Riot World Championship this year, it would have been a difficult decision for me to go or to stay and do Overwatch because I'm really excited about that game, and I kind of want to get on the ground floor of that because it's new and I think it has a lot of viability in the future. Some people may disagree with that. I actually do have a lot more information about that than you guys do, and that's my opinion. So maybe I would have gone, maybe I wouldn't have. Doa decided not to go because a lot of the reason was because he wanted to stay and cast Overwatch, and that's something that we have had actually written into our OGN contracts that we cast Overwatch for OGN since last year because we were both, when we saw the game, we were very convinced that this is going to be a big game, and we wanted to diversify ourselves. So that's sort of what it looks like to work for OGN. That's the sort of payment structure that I have arranged for them, but I am under no obligation to do any work for anybody besides OGN. Even if OGN wants me to do something, it's up to another broadcaster such as Riot or ESL to pay me for that. I can't be loaned out for free or any of that bullshit that the Riot casters have had to deal with over the years. I'm capable of streaming. I can stream and I can monetize my streams. I can be a Twitch partner. I can accept donations. I can get subscribers. I can play ads. I can make money. Same thing with YouTube. I can make my own content. In fact, I've made tons of my own content over the years, most famously SI, which has grown to be basically the #1 esports podcast in the world, in English at least. Maybe there's one bigger in Chinese or something, I don't know. But in terms of viewership, and listenership, et cetera, it is definitely the biggest esports broadcast. And it has been for years now. So I've got that where I can monetize, get additional income from that. From sponsors, I can get sponsors for myself. I've had several sponsors over the years that I make contracts with them to publicize them on my exterior content, my stream, my YouTube, Thorn and my joint YouTube into Insight on Esports, my Twitter, my Tumblr, everything like that. So that's another way that I can generate income as a freelancer. OGN doesn't care about any of this. In fact, they like me doing it because the more famous I am, the more viewers come to watch OGN. So they think it's good. And if I'm not doing work for them on the broadcast, they definitely encourage you to go out and do these things because it helps them as well. I can also write. I've had offers in the past to do things like writing articles for ESPN. I haven't had time really to sit down and do that, but I definitely could freelance as a writer for ESPN or The Score. I could negotiate my own rate there, et cetera, et cetera. I can do work for independent tourneys, such as Intel Extreme Masters, which I've done a bunch of now. In the past, I've worked with MLG, I've worked with Riot on independent broadcasts. I've worked with, places in Japan to do broadcasting for Vainglory for them. I've done a ton of stuff for independent broadcasters for which I am paid. And so that's another opportunity that I have when I don't have obligations at OGN. Remember, my contract with OGN says OGN comes first, so I have to do that, and I have to kind of clear it through them before I can actually go elsewhere. But they're very cool about that, and there's never really been any issues. I can also do other titles, and this is a really big one, is that because I work for OGN, frequently, because it's a TV station, they broadcast many, many different titles. As many of you know, Papa and Doa do Hearthstone. I've done Vainglory in the past. Doa and I have done StarCraft 2 for OGN previously. We're going to be doing Overwatch for them. So there's a lot of ways in which I can diversify myself as a caster and sort of keep myself relevant, because that's going to be the big theme here, is that esports is very different than traditional sports in that you can make a 30, 40-year career out of being a baseball or a football caster in real sports, because these sports stay around for a while. And even though every new esports developer these days loves to say, oh, we're going to make an esport that's around in 20 years, that's never actually happened before. Really, the longest running esport in the world was Brood War here in Korea, which ran from 99 till about 2012. It's sort of picking back up again, but not at the scale. Those were like the big Brood War years, really. So that was 13 years. That was a good run, but it's still not. It's still rare that you have a game that goes that long, and usually a game will peak for like 4 or 5 years. It'll sort of have a slow ramp up, peak it for 4 or 5 years, and then sort of slowly drop off over time. And that definitely did happen with Brood War. So even when we talk about it going to 2012, it's like it wasn't as popular towards the end of it by any means. And so that plateauing period is sort of when, as a caster, you want to start thinking about maybe diversifying into other titles. So those are the things that I can do as a freelance caster. And I have a very good deal, and I've made a lot of money doing this. And the problem is that the Riot casters, when we talk about what it means to be a salaried caster, and you have to keep in mind that the Riot casters are really the only casters from a major title that are salaried by the developer of the game. And this is very important because they have really unique restrictions that other casters in the big titles don't have at all. So when we talk about the Riot casters, when it means that they are salaried, it means that they have a flat wage. They have a yearly salary just like any other employee, and that can cover any amount of work. It covers the splits, it covers, I mean, this is crazy to me, but it covers the splits, it covers Worlds if they go to that, covers MSI if they go to that. They don't get paid any additional money for doing basically what is effectively now 7 extra weeks of casting and work, traveling around the world, like insane travel schedules, insane amounts of prep, because those 7 weeks don't even count the prep. I mean, you're prepping. For example, when I did Worlds, I was doing 2 to 3 weeks of prep in Korea. I was going to team houses, visiting them while they were boot camping, taking notes, talking to the players, trying to get that information, doing research on all the teams that maybe I hadn't caught up on as much over the course of the regular season, because there's a big dead time in between the end of summer and the start of Worlds. So this is all exclusive of that preparation. So realistically, we're talking more about 10 extra weeks of work a year. And some of the casters from Riot, they don't do very much, or they don't go to these events, or they play very small roles, but they are not the casters that do go the whole way of casting in every stage, groups, quarters, semis, finals, everything. There's no actual real tangible monetary benefit to them. And it's true that some of these casters do get paid higher salaries than the casters who are sort of lower tier, B tier casters within Riot. But it's nowhere near, like, the difference between what those guys make is like very small compared to what you should be making on a broadcast with the prestige and the viewership of Worlds, and the bonuses that they should be receiving as a result of that. So for third-party events such as Intel Extreme Masters, again, this can be a lot of work. It can be like a week of prep to go in to catch up with all the teams. To catch up with patches, etc. Because some of these IEM events happen like in December in the off season, and maybe you weren't paying attention. You were probably on vacation, because casters in League of Legends, basically the only time we get vacation for an extended period of time is November and December. So if there's an event in December or the end of November, which there are two IEMs in Oakland and Gyeonggi here in Korea, during that time period, there's going to be another week of prep. A lot of the times, these are post the new season patches from Riot, so like a ton of shit can change. So that's a lot of work in and of itself. Now, Riot will lend these casters out for free to IEM. So they are not paid any additional money. Now, to be fair to Riot, they don't force the casters to go to these events, but it's still really shit that they don't get paid for them. And many of the casters want to do this because it's their passion. It's my opinion that they should be compensated for the additional work. They are not able to actually monetize their streams, which is something that still confuses me, but we'll get to some of my theories about why that might be the case in a little bit. They're not allowed to do any other titles, competitive titles, like, for example, in November or December, if they wanted to go cast Clash Royale or Overwatch or CSGO, they literally can't go cast other things for other tournaments, which, again, really limits their career. And they can't actually grow their own YouTube channels or their own streams or provide avenues for monetization in the future. Now, they do have a stable income, but also people who can do all of these things, like the ESL casters like D-Man, they get a salary, like I do, but they can also monetize their streams, monetize their YouTube, create additional content. They get paid for doing external events, so these are all true things for the ESL casters as well. Now, they do get benefits, which are important in America. For me, I live in Korea. There's socialized medicine. It's not that big of a deal for me to not have medical insurance if I was in America. Obviously, that's very expensive as a freelancer, so you do have to kind of make more money in order to make up for that. And they do have retirement. Now, it's important to note that ever since the complete sale of Riot to Tencent, they no longer get stock options, so that's not even on the table anymore. I think there's a profit sharing system in place, but that when we'll talk about the actual how much money later, not in terms of specific numbers. I actually can't give those to you guys because I have NDAs out the ass and confidentiality clauses that I can't tell you, like I can be sued. So I really can't do that, but I can give you some, let's say, scale of difference, where it's vague enough, but you guys will get the picture that you could probably pay for your own medical insurance. You can definitely pay for your own medical insurance and retirement account with the difference that is being made between these two guys, or between these two like freelance and Riot casters. And most casters in the world are freelance casters. Like I said, between other games, the CSGO guys that you see on E-League or at the majors, the StarCraft 2 guys that you see on GOM TV, or in running the Blizzard circuit, DreamHack, etc., etc., the Dota guys at the international and the big majors for Dota. And so many of these guys are now, and have been for some time, really eclipsing the earnings of the Riot casters by like a pretty significant margin. So to sort of put this in perspective right off the bat, so a lot of the Riot casters, you have to understand the history of what happened with compensation for casters at Riot, because it was really weird. Now, one thing that Riot did at the beginning that was great was give salaries, was give stable positions, because if we're talking about the beginning of the LCS, like 2012, early 2013, 2012 was when things were ramping up after Season 2 Worlds, and even by the time Season 2 Worlds, they had, salaried casters that were already there at Riot. The weird thing that happened was that Riot decided that the caster pay scale was going to be based off of your previous job. So guys that came in from the outside that were very well paid in previous careers before they were full-time casters ended up sometimes making twice as much money as people who were internal at Riot that came from like player support and stuff like that, that worked within the company in jobs that were not very well paying. Now, some of these guys had extensive casting experience going back, 5, 6, 7, 8 years before then. So because of their talent, they were picked up like inside of Riot. But what this meant was that there was a pretty large difference in pay scale. And large differences in pay scale happen in entertainment, right? An extra isn't going to get paid as much as Brad Pitt. It depends on your fame, depends on what you bring to the broadcast, your talent for casting or for acting or whatever it is in the entertainment industry. That makes a big difference. But these differences really shouldn't have existed, I think, at the beginning of things. And the problem is that all raises for these casters were sort of based off of those initial salary value numbers at the same time, or at that time, so the raises were not quite as good. Now, this didn't really change at all for the Riot casters until about 2015, and then sometimes as late as 2016, or late 2015, early 2016, where a lot of these casters did receive some pretty significant pay bumps. Things got evened out a little bit in as much as I think it was fair, but it's still well below what a lot of the casters earn in other titles, and especially if you consider the workload. Because really the workload for League of Legends is insane compared to other titles. In other titles, the LANs, sure, they happen on the weekends. There's a lot of movement in the Counter-Strike circuit in particular right now. But many of these leagues are online leagues that you can cast from your house or wherever you want to go, or you cast at a local studio, like at ESL in Los Angeles or Face It or wherever you have. And then these guys run the circuit, but they get paid a lot of money for 3-4 days of work in the circuit. And they do, a couple of these a month, and then they got majors, they get paid more money, and then they have E-League, for example, for CSGO, which pays a lot of money and very fair rates, I think, for casters at the current time. And they're treated like professional broadcast talent because Turner has years and years and years of doing sports casts, and that's what they're good at doing. And they compensate people appropriately for that time and for that effort and for their talent. But as we said, Riot has been falling behind. Again, at the beginning, it was wonderful because they were actually making probably more money outside of everybody outside of Korea, basically, because OGN had already been established for 15 years, nearly, by the time that Champion started, 13 years technically, 14, somewhere around there. So they were used to paying broadcast talent like broadcast talent, and so for a long time, I was making more salary than the Riot casters up until about 2015, when they sort of jumped up to my level, but they don't have any of the other things that I have. And we're just talking about salary here, and that accounts for my League of Legends casting from about January, until September, and then I would get extra money from MSI, IEM, Worlds, YouTube, streaming, sponsors, etc., etc. Okay? So even in 2015, I would say that my conservative estimate would be that I made probably 3 times as much money as some of the Riot casters, and even the top Riot casters, I probably made at least double. At least double. And obviously, their English language broadcast is larger than the one in Korea. The professionalism of the broadcast is on par with OGN. Riot's production crew does an amazing job at some of these tournaments. My camera's freaking out. And the wages had really just never been there for Riot, and they're still not there as it stands today. And they've well fallen behind other games, which is not really acceptable with the largest broadcast in the world, and when you expect so much out of your casters, because League is unique in that there's just so much work to do. You're talking about 2 splits of year, plus MSI, plus Worlds. That literally runs. You are working from January until November. And you don't get breaks because when you're not actually broadcasting, you're prepping for the international events. And then if you do the IEMs in November and December, it's like you get 2 weeks of vacation a year, basically, if you're actually running the League of Legends circuit. So it's an incredibly, compared to other casts, it's incredibly demanding, much, much more demanding. Obviously, there's more travel involved with the CSGO circuit when you move all around the world constantly, but E-League has, at least kept casters in one place for multiple weeks at a time, a lot of the time, so that they actually have some level of stability in terms of location. But for the most part, the CSGO guys just sort of run the circuit. Same thing with the Dota guys, the StarCraft 2 guys, at least in Korea, obviously they're here most of the time. They do also make more money than the Riot casters. And so it's kind of like, what is the point of being a Riot caster? So the other thing that Riot did was they basically wouldn't allow their casters, unless it was very specific circumstances, to even do interviews or outside content, particularly in 2013 and 2014. Now we see Riot allowing Kobe to go on shows like Late Night League, the new Yahoo eSports show, but he's not going to be compensated for that, so that's also kind of shit. But they couldn't even do interviews, really, unless it went through a million hoops, and they didn't Riot did not trust their casters to like even represent the game. So it was really hard for them to get their name and their faces and their opinions out there, because the only time they had that was basically on broadcast, and we never really, unless you personally knew them like I did, the fans really didn't get to know the casters that well, and that really hurts their brand in the long haul. And one of the major issues with Riot too is that even today they do not have contracts with Riot. They have standard employee agreements. Now, the reason why contracts are very important in the entertainment industry is that it sets very strict parameters on what you can and can't do, and gives you protections, such as what happens, I have to have a certain number of casts that I can do in a given space of time. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I'm going to permanently damage my vocal cords. And we've seen this happen with guys like Pyra. Now, he did obviously get a rest because he literally had surgery and couldn't talk at the end of last year. But even in this year, in the LPL and the OPL, the Australian office, the Oceanic office for Riot that does that, you had guys like Fish that were casting like 25 games in a span of several days. And that is, like, that terrifies me. I know guys like Tasteless who have permanently damaged their vocal cords, guys like Pyra. And that's not an acceptable way to do business, but there's no actual talent contract here. Basically, all their job duties are described by Riot's esports management as verbal contracts, where they got nothing on paper besides the fact that they work for Riot Games. And this is just like appalling to me that there aren't very strict provisions about what their actual job responsibilities are, what happens in the future, et cetera, et cetera. So one thing that people like to say is that, well, the stability is worth it. You always have a job at Riot Games, right? It really is not worth it at all unless you're making a literal shit ton of money. Because the very strict requirements that Riot puts on you means that because you can't do other games and you can't build your own brand, I can't build up my YouTube channel, I can't build up my stream. So if League of Legends dies, or if I decide to leave Riot, or if Riot fires me, I have nothing to fall back on. I have to build everything from scratch at that point in time. Maybe somebody else hires me, but a lot of the Riot casters have never done another esports title. So when developers look at that, they have, basically all they have is their Twitter. They've got no proof that these casters drive actual hits to content, because they've got nothing on their own channels or their own streams. So you don't have a good idea of what the fan base is, what the demographics of that fan base is. I have all this information because I have my YouTube channel and I can see it, and I can show other people what happens when I post a video. I can show the age range of the people that listen to this. And that's valuable information when people want to hire you and hit certain demographics. So they can't get that. So they're basically essentially in this cage at Riot, and they can't escape because Riot has a monopoly on League of Legends. So they have nowhere to go. So they have no way to actually build their brand for the future. And we're talking about Riot. Remember, this is a company that has not released a game in 7 years since League of Legends, except for Mechs and Minions, which is a board game. In terms of what they're working on, is their next title an esport? Can these guys even transition into another Riot title? Sure, they have job security. A guy like Jat, who is on the Live Balance team, has other skills. But what if Jat wants to be a career caster? If League dies, or Riot decides to stop doing the broadcast, or the broadcast numbers get really small and it sort of dwindles into obscurity, which it will eventually. That's what all esports do eventually. It's going to be a newer, shinier game that comes out in the future. And there's going to be another big hit. There always is. It's like I said, comes every 4 or 5 years. It's going to be another big game on the rise, and that the current game that is just going to be plateauing and slowly wasting away. But what happens if these guys want to be career casters? What happens if they don't want to do another job at Riot Games? If they don't want to move into another department? What if their career ambition is just to cast forever, to cast for 30 years? Well, then they're extremely limited because they haven't shown what they can do on their own. They haven't shown that they can even cast other games a lot of the time. If you're trying to get a job in a different title, being shackled like that is incredibly problematic and can really kind of kill your career, because you've got nothing to show for yourself. All you have to show is what the developer or what the broadcaster did for you. And that's a pretty painful way to negotiate for a new job a lot of the time as a caster, or to make a case for why somebody should take a risk on you in a new title. or support your career in that new title, no matter how famous you are. And these guys are very famous. Now, could some of them make that leap? Sure. I mean, they're very talented. I'm sure some developers or some broadcasters would take that risk on them, but it's not guaranteed, and it certainly makes things significantly more difficult. So when we talk about the Riot casters and what this means, if I was going to, let's say, in an alternate universe where this was actually possible, let's say Riot was going to offer me a job tomorrow, and they said, all right, Monte, we want you to cast full-time for us. And they said, you can't cast any other games, and you're not going to get paid for IEM, because we're going to loan you out because we have a partnership with IEM. And you have to demonetize your YouTube and your Twitch. You can't do Summoning Insight anymore. You can only cast League of Legends ever, or another Riot title in the future, which who the fuck knows if that's going to ever come out or be successful or even be an esport. I have no idea. I would say I need a metric ass ton of money, because those constraints, exclusivity to a specific title or to a specific developer, that takes up my entire year, that strips me of my own content that I have made, and my own independent income streams. They say I can't have sponsors. They say I can't do the kind of consulting work or other business stuff I do on the side. Again, I already made in 2015, and I continue to make more money than the Riot casters. Like, basically, I told you I'm already making like double. They probably have to double it again, realistically, because that is such an insane career risk for a caster. And there's no way that that job security is worth it, because I'm already sort of at the top of the heap in terms of casters worldwide. I'm one of the most famous casters already. And I can get good contracts with other people that aren't going to place those restrictions on me, and I can sort of bounce around and do whatever I want. So that's the problem, is that the exclusivity and the little box that they put the Riot casters into, that has to be a golden cage in order for it to be worth it for them. And right now, it certainly isn't. Like, the guys from CSGO are making more. Like, everybody's making more money. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I told you guys in the last video that for a tournament that has the viewership of Worlds, that has that level of prestige, where you want the best of the best casters to be there. For TI, like I said, I know some of the Dota casters last year got paid in 2015, sometimes half to 2/3, no joke, they made off of a 3-week tournament what Riot casters would make in a year. Like, that's the big difference. And certainly, are there opportunities outside of that? Not at the same level? Sure, but there are Dota majors, there's ways to stay afloat and make a lot of money, and those guys were definitely making more money than some, if not all, of the Riot casters, kind of the cream of the crop of Dota. And CSGO this year is just ridiculous. I mean, the CSGO guys are really doing well for themselves. There's tons of tournaments for them to work at. They can pick and choose. They're not obligated to go to any tournament, to every tournament. They can not go to one if they don't feel like it. I know Thorin does that all the time. If they want to do the major, they can. If they don't want to do this smaller cup, they can take a vacation, chill out for a while. There's no level of obligation there to just continue to grind 24/7. You can actually have your own shit in your own life, and you can even just do content. If you don't want to go, just make your own content on the side. A lot of the guys like Anders and Sembler and Room on Fire are making a lot of content these days, and that's sort of their prerogative. And it's not only that this is a bad deal for the Riot casters, but I'm going to go into my history now with negotiating for Riot, because it's not only my belief that the Riot casters are underpaid. I don't even know how you can argue that, and I think that every other caster outside of Riot would tell you that too. In fact, I'll probably do a different sort of caster roundtable with guys from CSGO and Dota maybe later this week or in a couple weeks, and we'll just all sit around and chat about this, so you guys can get more information out of other scenes, so we can help to really push this forward, not only with Riot but with the other developers as well. And I do think that a union is very important in order to sort of set minimums on salaries and make sure that we're all protected, and that developers and broadcasters are not taking advantage of us in any kind of way. So I'm going to talk about my own history of negotiation with Riot, because I not only believe that, as I was saying, that the Riotcasters are underpaid, I believe that Riot has, my opinion is that Riot has intentionally basically capped the market with their monopoly in order to drive caster rates down within League of Legends. And there's no direct evidence that I have of this, but when we talk about exactly what happened in these negotiations, you'll see there's a lot of weird circumstantial evidence that shows that Riot was basically intentionally keeping freelance caster rates very low because they were afraid of what would happen, in my opinion, if their casters were to demand rates as freelancers, which would significantly increase their income. So, let us go back in time to 2013. So this was my first event working for Riot. I had been working for a year for OGN already on Champions. And in 2013, Riot unilaterally, without even talking to me, announced that I was going to be on the analyst desk for the World Championship. I had no idea that this was going to happen. Again, they never contacted me whatsoever. So my agent, I'm represented by WMEIMG. At the time, it was an agency called Global eSports Management, and they were bought as the eSports division of WMEIMG, which many of you know is a huge, huge agency, one of the biggest in the entire world, and I'm currently represented by them. So my agent began having conversations with Waylon Roselle, who is the director of eSports for Riot and continues to be one of the, he now is, I guess, the co-director. I don't really know, but his title is director of esports. So my agent began talking with him, and their initial offer for me to do 5 weeks of work at the World Championship was about 50% of what MLG paid me to do a weekend, 3 to 4 days worth of work in 2012. So this is when I was working for MLG, or with MLG. I was freelancing then too. I had a job at a law firm as my day job, and they offered me total. So that's not per week, per weekend. It's like I made this amount of money in 3 to 4 days, and they offered me half of that for 5 weeks total of work. And the justification that was given to me and my agent was that since OGN was paying me my salary during the period of Worlds. Now remember, I'm a freelancer and my contract with OGN has nothing, zero, to do with Riot Games. Zero. Their justification was that since OGN was a partner of Riot, and that I should be basically doing this for a pittance, because I was getting paid by somebody else that had nothing to do with this. Obviously, that was pretty shit and offensive and not okay. But there wasn't very much wiggle room. And even when the rate went up to double that, so now we're talking about the actual rate I received for 5 weeks of work was the same rate that I would receive for 3 to 4 days of work in America. And remember, this includes for World's international travel to NA at the time. When I was working with MLG, it was domestic flights for a weekend to Anaheim or Dallas or Raleigh or wherever it was that I was doing that work. And Waylon spun it as, well, we want to use you in the future, and this is a good stepping stone towards a relationship with Riot to get you casting, because they just wanted me on the analyst desk. And it's exposure, like the classic freelance line. It's good for your exposure, which it was. And I took that deal, even though my agent and I were both appalled by this deal. Now, remember, Riot announced for Season 3 they had 32 million viewers or whatever. And so it was a huge, huge event. And I was paid very poorly, even at the time, for freelance rates by Riot. Now, was it worth it? Yes, it was. The exposure was worth it for me. And I was paid by OGN at the same time. Again, doesn't matter that I was paid by OGN. Had nothing to do with Riot. So it wasn't like I was starving during that time. Riot's production staff has always been awesome. Riot takes very good care of their casters at events in terms of food and housing and support and everything like that. All wonderful. I love working with Riot. I really do love working with Riot from the production side. Producers are great. my colleague casters are wonderful. The team surrounding them, stats guides, everything is fucking awesome. I love it. That's one of the big draws for me to work with Riot is because it's so good. But the compensation is, pretty bad. So that was my first experience with Riot. Wasn't great. From that perspective. It was great for my visibility at the time, which is one of the things that Riot really does offer, and we'll get to that in a little bit. For new casters, Riot is awesome because you can't make that much money freelancing, and having that stable income and getting the exposure is very, very valuable. But past a certain point, that dies away pretty quickly. So it was worth it then. So now we're in 2014. And I make a deal with Riot. I say, all right, I will do All-Stars and Worlds. And we just did this at the beginning of the year. I forgot to add some very crucial details to the 2013 Worlds thing. So nobody else on the analyst desk that I know of was paid for that event. I only did analyst desk. Everybody else was doing it on the analyst desk for free. They were not paid anything for their time. Basically, in terms of workload, it was actually more to be on the analyst desk because I was on the analyst desk after every single game at the World Championship, which meant that I really didn't get any breaks during the broadcast. I spent a huge amount of time on camera. I was having to analyze each and every game. So I probably spent more time actually working than many of the casters at that event because I was doing it throughout every single group stage match, every quarter, every semi, the finals, everything like that. So yeah, it was a lot. It was good. I enjoyed myself. I'd do it again. But the compensation wasn't there, and nobody else at the time, to my knowledge, was being compensated for work on the analyst desk. So 2014, I talked to Riot, and I negotiate with my agent a deal for the year. Okay, so this included All-Stars in 2014 and Worlds. So we just said, let's just hammer out like a chunk of money, lump sum for both events. And Riot said, like, oh, well, we really can't justify, this rate per week, et cetera, et cetera. So what they did was very interesting. We got to a number that we agreed on, sort of. It was still kind of definitely lower than I would have liked. But what they did was they shunted money out of All-Stars and Worlds, and they put it in this bucket called pre-Worlds content, which is they wanted me to do some stuff in the lead up to Worlds. And what this ended up being was 1 2-hour interview that I gave about the history of the Korean scene in Korea to Riot's documentary crew that got included in Road to Worlds. But it was like an insane amount of money for that. And I think it was because they didn't want me to be able to say to their casters that I was making more money per week. So they sort of like shunted this money into this weird place where it wasn't technically for the casting work or the work I was doing at these events, but we got to a number that was like, I guess it was acceptable. So that was like another very strange kind of sign that they were trying to depress rates for actual casting. So then we get to 2015, and I try and negotiate the rate for MSI and Worlds again. At the beginning of the year, when we're negotiating for MSI, I'm like, why don't we just get this all the way now so everybody knows what's going on? I can go ahead and do the pre-Worlds content, et cetera, et cetera. And Riot said, no, we want you for MSI, but we don't know about Worlds yet. We don't know if we're going to use you. We don't want to commit to that, et cetera, et cetera. I said, you know what, whatever. So we get to a rate for the World Championship, or for MSI rather. And I'm really not happy with this rate. And so I want a slight increase to this rate for the week's work of work at MSI. And basically, nobody moves. And it's like a game of chicken in the negotiation. Eventually, it comes down to the absolute wire. And I agree to go for the rate that Riot wanted me to go at. They didn't cave. And then what happens is my flight, the cost of my flight has gone up by a lot more than the difference in the money that we were negotiating over that period. So Riot actually ended up losing more money through this negotiation than just paying me the rate that I wanted initially. So that was very strange. So then Riot comes up to me for Legends Rising and tries to request interviews with me. And their doc team contacts me and said, hey, Monte, we need you to do this. And I said, I don't have a deal for this. Last year I had a deal for this. You guys are making promotional material for your game and your company. I need to be paid for it. And that's the reason why you don't see me in Legends Rising, is because they never decided to actually compensate me for my time. And the only way, guys, remember, the only way that I make money, my job, is being an expert on Korean League of Legends. That's my job. So I don't really give that away for free to people who are doing marketing tools. I'll do brief interviews, but I'm not going to do extensive interviews, work and stuff for the developer for free to promote their game. So I didn't end up doing that. Then it comes to Worlds. Riot argues then that my rate at MSI was too much, so they reduce my rate for 2015 Worlds. Obviously wasn't too happy about that either. I end up going anyway. After they reduce my rate, I'm like, hang on here. And that's when I started going around talking to the Halo guys, Hearthstone guys, CSGO guys, Dota guys, StarCraft 2 guys. I just talked to everybody, all the caster freelancers in the scene. And that's when I find out that the rate that I was paid for Worlds was like, again, depending on the actual event, like 40 to 70%, which the other OGN casters and I said in our statement about why we weren't doing MSI, 40 to 70% of an industry standard rate. Now, I was not looking, and neither was Doa, neither were Papa, to be paid the most of any freelance caster in the scene. We just wanted like a normal rate. That's all we wanted, and we would have done it because we like working for Riot and we like the game, and they just wouldn't offer it to us. So we decided that for the good of the industry, that it was important to make it known to other freelancers and to make it very public that we were not going to do it. It was a business relationship. Riot decided we weren't worth it. That's fine. We decided that we needed to let our fans know why we weren't attending, and we needed to let the market know what Riot was doing because it was pretty unacceptable. So we didn't end up doing that event. Now, obviously I wasn't invited to Worlds here in 2016, but Papa Smithy, Riot, to their credit, has paid him more than they ever paid me or Doa for any event. And I would consider it low, but on the low end of fair for Papa Smithy, considering that he hasn't done that many international events. He hasn't been a full-time caster for that long. He's a great caster, but he's not like, he doesn't have the same level of experience as myself or Doa do. And if you actually think about it, Doa and I have cast more games of League of Legends than any other English casters in the world, and way more than anybody at Riot. We started casting before LCS existed, and we cast every single game of Champions pretty much for multiple seasons. When Doa started doing other work, I was still casting with Papa Smithy like every single game. And remember that Korea also used best of threes like a year and a half before Riot switched over, and I was doing like 200 games a season of League of Legends. I also did Masters, 3 seasons of Champions compared to just 2 seasons of LCS. You get the point. Like, I've done probably, I would say conservatively, 3 times as many games as any Riot caster, probably more than that as a caster. So it's also that experience that you have to take into account when you're negotiating these wages. And if Riot doesn't want to pay that, again, that's fine. But the rates they were offering were very low, and again, I think that is because they were afraid of what would happen if their own casters were to receive similar rates, because their own salaries would basically, double to triple on a conservative estimate. So that's kind of where I ended up with my negotiations with Riot. It's unfortunate. I definitely would love to do more events with them if the price was right. But the thing is that for me, the exposure isn't really worth it. I don't see much growth from my brand or my social media or my YouTube or anything from doing international events for Riot anymore. 2015, basically I saw the same number of people following me or interacting with me on social media as I did in an average week. It was, obviously there was an increase, but not by a significant margin. So doing things for Riot for less money than industry standard doesn't really make sense for me because I've sort of maxed out the visibility in the League of Legends market. So it's actually more productive for me to take myself and now go to other games where they will actually pay me an industry standard wage, which is just better. And then I get exposure to an entirely new market at the same time. So it's much more beneficial for me to do that right now because the exposure argument really doesn't hold any water for me. It doesn't hold any water either for the top Riot casters. They're not like they should honestly go do other things at this point in time. Go work on other titles. Go work for other companies because it'll be much more rewarding for them from a financial perspective. And they're already like some of the most famous, if not league casters, because of the size of the broadcast, are already super famous. So there's not a lot of reason to do things for the exposure any longer. Now, one other thing that tells me a lot about what Riot does is that, and their sort of attitude towards freelancers is even this year. So I haven't worked for Riot this year, but I have talked to many people who have. And a lot of the people that are not salaried Riot casters who have done work on the broadcast are paid what I would consider 2/3 to 50% ish of a real rate for what they do on those Riot broadcasts, those that are paid. And something very interesting that I found out when I was doing research for this video is that when Riot started the alternate streams in the summer season this year, none of the current LCS Pro players that contributed to those streams were paid by Riot. Even when they were casting best of fives in like mid lane matchups or bot lane matchups or jungle matchups or whatever in the playoffs, as far as I can tell, no pro LCS player, and I've talked to most of them, has been paid for their work on the broadcast. I think that is not okay. I think that if you're using the pro players to broadcast, you should probably compensate them for it in some way, shape, or form. And even the people who aren't pro players currently, we're talking about current LCS pros, even other contributors, some of those people weren't paid either. And they're not even actively getting paid. You know, Riot could maybe argue that there's a stipend for the pro players, even though it has nothing to do with them broadcasting. But they told the pro players they should do it for exposure. That's what they told them. All the pros said, Riot said, you should do this for exposure, blah, 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 blah. Didn't pay them. They didn't pay some of the non-pro players, current pro players, that have done broadcast work on those alternate streams or on the analyst desk. And those that they did pay, who are exclusively not current pro players, I would say, again, was a 2/3, 50% of what I would think would be an acceptable rate to be paid for a day's work of casting or being broadcast talent. And obviously that's not at the high end. They're not like the superstar casters that have much more experience, but that would be my estimate for if they were to come up to me and ask like what should you be paid, I'd give them a number, and the number they received was 50%, 2/3 of that. So it wasn't even really competitive whatsoever compared to what they could get in other titles. And again, they can't get these numbers because Riot has a monopoly on this broadcast. There is no other place to go for League of Legends besides OGN. That's like the safe zone that is slowly being chipped away at as the broadcast gets handed over to Spo TV. And we have these split broadcasts right now. So one may argue that's not even safe in Korea anymore. So that's kind of the status of freelance casting. And I also believe, in my opinion, that this is the reason why Riot doesn't let the casters get paid for IEM. Because if they got paid what they should be paid for those days of work, it would bring into question all of their work for the season, you know, the number of days of prep work that they do for IEM and the broadcast days. If they were paid like that for IEM, again, it would probably double to triple their income. If we consider all of the work they do for Riot. And because they have that stability, should they take maybe a little bit less money? Sure. I mean, maybe a little bit, but again, the lack of streaming and everything else, like, it's not worth it. They need to be paid way more than the freelancers for that because they have no way to develop their own brands on their own. And again, in the long term, when you're looking to jump games or to add more games to your repertoire, or maybe you just want to be a fucking streamer, I don't know. then you just can't do that. So it really should come at a very high premium to keep them inside the cage that Riot has built for them. But they don't have a way to get out of it, and they don't have a way to negotiate because Riot itself dictates everything that goes on with League of Legends, and because they can't do other games, there's no method for them to actually escape, right? They don't have an easy way to bridge themselves into a new title by saying, I'm just going to do this during the off season, see where it goes. Maybe I get a better offer, et cetera, et cetera. They don't even have that opportunity, so they're basically just stuck in caster wage hell forever, unless they take a big risk and just decide to leave on their own. I also think that they're not allowed to monetize their streams because many of these guys, I've seen guys like Freak and Rivington get 15, 20,000 concurrent viewers on Twitch. They're great streamers. They're very entertaining. I like watching them. I love watching Riv cast himself. It's amazing to watch on his own stream. If you guys haven't seen that YouTube video, go Google Riv casting himself. It's amazing. What would happen if Deficio or Jat started doing VOD reviews? I can get, I've gotten 10, 20,000 concurrents from doing VOD reviews myself. That can be very profitable and very good to get numbers to show and try and get sponsors. So the thing is that I think if Riot started allowing these guys to stream, that these casters would quickly realize that streaming is more lucrative than working for Riot, and then they would have a negotiating tool to use with Riot and say, hey, I'm making this much money streaming. If you want me to keep casting for you, we need to talk about that. You need to up my rate so it's actually competitive with my streaming. Maybe we can do a little bit of both on the side, but as long as they can't do that, they never actually have the information that they need to negotiate properly. Riot has cut off absolutely every method of income or even data, really, so that they can't negotiate properly with their salaries. And Riot has this information. Remember that I told Riot all of these numbers. Doa, Pop, and I told Riot these numbers when we were negotiating for MSI. So Riot is fully aware of what freelance casters make in other titles at this point. And they continue to be on this really ridiculous track. One thing I should add is that I have talked to some of the pro players, and they are being compensated for the alternate streams at Worlds this year, but it is very low compensation. Again, like 50% of a real rate. So at least that's changed, but it's not, it's pretty bad. So there's also the fact that I can sort of hint at some other stuff that's coming up here. If we look at the E-League rates, so this is kind of the same discussion that we can talk about in terms of what are rates right now. Well, when we talk about E-League, and there's a lot of stuff that many people, you guys will not know about, like going on behind the scenes with new games coming up, new leagues forming, et cetera, et cetera. And basically these league rates and these contracts, if Riot casters had a comparable daily rate to what some of these new contracts are and to what, say, E-League is and some of the more prestigious tournaments and leagues in other titles, I ran the numbers on this, and Riot casters would basically double to triple their income if they had these contracts. If you count the number of casting days, broadcast days that they do, let me put it this way. I took a look at this, and I compared it to some of the Riot casters' salaries. And if they did just Spring Split, Summer Split, including playoffs and Worlds, the amount of money that they would make compared to some of the contracts that are flying around out there right now would be about 2.5 times what they make in a year. Not including MSI, not including IEM. Also, they would be able to do their own streams and make their own content on the side. It wouldn't be restrictive in that way, so that wouldn't be really a big issue at all. So there's definitely a lot to think about, I think, in terms for the Riot casters and for Riot itself. And I hope Riot steps up and actually pays them what they're worth. The other thing to consider, too, is that PTL is part of their salary. For example, Jat doing things like Teamfight Breakdown, For example, today it was released that Jat and Deficio and Spawn would be doing a cool like list of the top 20 players at Worlds, where they all submitted their own list and they all talked about it, and they're going to be releasing these little video clips on each player. I think it's fucking awesome. I'm really excited to watch that. I think all those guys are very smart analysts, and I'm interested to hear their opinions. But that's also included in their salary. So if you start putting all those numbers in with the rates too, you quickly get up to numbers that are like 3 to 4 times what they're currently making. But they're just sort of in this like content sweatshop right now where they just keep getting more and more stuff piled onto them by Riot. Also, the fact that many of them wrote articles, previews on groups A, B, C, and D. They could have sold this content to ESPN, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like more money that's being left on the table. And we're not even counting sponsorships here. For example, or even the content. Think about, for instance, how much content has been denied to the fans over the years. I would love to do content with guys like Deficio and Jat and Spawn and the other Kobe, the other analysts. It would be fucking sweet if we had a podcast. We could have had a podcast for years now. Years on our own. We could have gotten sponsors for it. We could have split revenue from YouTube. We could have worked together to grow our own channel. And we could have then made a partnership like Thorn and I have that's going to last from game to game to game. I'm going to be working with Thorn probably in 10 years' time. Like, we're going to keep working together. I like working with Thorin. I like the content we make. Fans like it. We want to keep that partnership going. And we don't want to keep it just going in League of Legends. We want to keep it going in future titles as well. And maybe we could have done that. Think about what you guys, the fans, have been denied by this whole thing, which is whatever these guys could think of. And not everything has to be super high production quality. Like I said, Thor and I have the biggest esports podcast in the world, and it's us on Skype because we can't even ever get together in the same location because we're always like traveling in different places for our jobs. But it gets huge numbers of hits, and it's had sponsors and everything like that. And I think that's, we're looking forward to the future. What Thor and I, my goal is that we want to, we don't have a sponsor right now, but when we pick up, we're looking at more sponsorship options now, is one of the goals that Thor and I have had for a long time is to pay people who come on the show, to pay the guests. For our next sponsorship, I have the company set up now. It took some time to set up the companies and get everything rolling, but we can do that now. And I want to pay the guests that come on these shows. And there's just so much that these guys can do outside of the Riot box. And it makes me really sad that they haven't been able to diversify their careers or really follow their own ambitions when it comes to developing themselves as personalities and as celebrities and interact with the fans at their own behest and at their own free will, to be able to monetize themselves properly. And they've just left just a mountain of money on the table over the years, like absolutely huge. And this applies to like the top tier, the A-list casters at Riot. And I do appreciate what Riot does. One thing Riot has done really well is provided training for new casters, for example, when Deficio started out, they were paying for like a speech coach for him to get rid of his Danish accent. They've done really wonderful things at the same time at the low level. But this is kind of like Riot in a nutshell right now, where it started like good. Like the foundation was solid, the stipends, everything was great in the early parts of the LCS. But over time, like everybody just overtook them by a massive degree. And at this juncture, the exposure just isn't worth it. Like you guys like Jat and Kobe can't get Riv, they can't get more exposure than they already have. It's not doing anything they are at the top of the casting, in the top of the biggest esport in the English-speaking world. At some point, you guys they actually have to get fucking paid for their work that's commensurate with being the elite in the elite esport, right? Otherwise, what's the future for this? They're all just going to leave. And I do think that unless Riot changes dramatically, and frankly, even if Riot doesn't, or even if they do change dramatically, I think you guys are going to see casters that you really like start to exit League of Legends by the end of this year. Because Riot hasn't been a market leader in years now in this regard. And I don't really trust them to ever be a market leader again, because they haven't shown that they have this desire to match the industry standard. And it's only been, I hope this changes things. But again, it's only that after years of this and only now that I have had to just absolutely, all my business ties, my team, my casting, everything has been severed from working directly with Riot, that I can come out and say this. And I'm not doing this for myself. Like, I don't gain anything if the Riot casters get more money. I hope they do. They're my colleagues, my friends. That the reason I'm doing this is because I want to see the industry in a better place, and I want to see League of Legends talent gets paid like talent and have real talent contracts that they can negotiate with Riot, and have a way that they can keep their careers. Because I want to work with these guys in the future. I want them to have long careers. I respect them. I love working with them as a colleague, and I'd like for this to go on for years to come. So I felt like I could have just sat and said nothing. But I don't think that's right. And I don't think it's right for this industry. And a lot of the stuff that I've been saying recently has the potential to damage my relationship with, really damage my relationship with Riot, obviously. But I think in the long term, it's better that this information gets out there so that there can be an actual change that occurs. I think that's really important. So I'll probably try and answer some questions that you guys have on this topic. I know it's been a lot of information, but I think it's really important to understand like what the Riot casters are going through and why they can't say anything because of the monopoly that Riot has, and because they effectively have had their legs kicked out from under them when it comes to being able to make any kind of transition to an alternate game or an alternate career as a streamer or a content producer. Or it's just shocking. It's just shocking, really. And again, I'm going to try and set up probably some sort of roundtable with some of the other casters in other games so that we can discuss this more in depth, talk about the career of casting in the long term, what goals should be, and maybe that'll give you guys some additional insight as well. And I hope this really does help things. I hope Riot realizes that it's not acceptable to treat freelancers this way. To say that they should do things for exposure and underpay them or not pay them at all, I think is just massively messed up. To keep their talent contained in a little box where they can't even diversify or make their own content or be talent. So I hope that was informative for you guys. And I'll be doing some more vlogs in the coming few days. I did this one instead of talking about the announcement about the world's prize pool. I should probably do one on that as well, because I have thoughts on the expansion via the crowdfunding and Riot's sort of vague promises towards a bright future without any concrete details. So I think it's important to discuss that. It is a good step forward, but there's a lot more that's needed. And we'll probably be talking about some other topics like booths and stuff soon too. Booths not only for League, but like for every esport, because it's not just League that has the no booth problem, and it really annoys me. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.